It's the third and final day of the Fischer Random portion of the Champions Showdown. Going into today, Levon Aronian leads up top with 4.5 points out of 6, and Magnus Carlsen, Hikaru and Wesley So trail him by half a point. Now, there's big money up top, but before we get into the games, guys, I very rarely do this, but I just want to show you that 63% of those of you that enjoy my videos are actually not subscribed to the channel. Do me a favor, if you enjoy the content, it's helped you get better at chess, helped you get into the game, just hit the subscribe button. It helps me achieve my goals, and I'm trying to hit that 100K mark, and I'll make a thank you video after that. If you don't like it, you can always unsubscribe. Let's jump into the games. First round today featured MVL versus Dominguez Perez. This one began with the bishops like this, so you would expect an early bishop opener. Nope, we got a Scandinavian. It's kind of weird to bring the queen out this early. And actually, Linier played a nice move here, g3, which I did say to open up the bishop. Bishop f4, hitting the queen is the idea. And he offered a queen trade very early and got just a better position on move 5. And then he won a pawn, and then he took something like 80 moves to convert that pawn advantage by slowly improving his position and simplifying it into a knight versus bishop situation where he centralizes his king and activates his rooks and shuffles around a little bit while his opponent gets into time pressure, figuring out what he's going to do, and then creates a passed pawn on the e-file, and then pushes that passed pawn a little bit, and then wins a few pawns, and then gets that into an endgame where he has still the few pawn advantage, but then Linier continues to create counterplay, and then in this position on move 73, he resigns because he cannot defend 2 pawns in a knight versus bishop endgame. MVL has been struggling, so it's cool to see him bounce back, whereas Linier Dominguez was actually doing quite well out the gate, but MVL picks up a win in round number 7. And then we go to Magnus Carlsen. Magnus Carlsen is a genius. That's not a newsflash. That's just, in case you ever doubted the man. Magnus Carlsen in this setup plays directly for the center and actually sacrifices his rook. By the way, if anybody's confused how castling works, you could have castled as early as the first move. But he castles, gives up his rook, and basically invests fully into his bishop. And, as we will see in a little bit, the 3-on-2 on the queen side. And you might say, Levy, why does that matter? Why does 3-on-2 even matter? Well, you'll hear a lot of strong players say that in any endgame, the 3-on-2 on that side of the board will lead to the possibility of creating a passed pawn in the future. And this position shows why sacrificing the exchange is so powerful. Watch as Magnus just steadily improves his position, and then look at the position right here. Even here, I will say. Look at this position. Everything that Black has done has been the optimal developing move. He's put his rooks in the center, his queen's active, knight is here, bishop is here, and yet it's Magnus who is actually trying to play this position for a win, because at any point he can rotate this way, and go for this, or play on the queen side with a5. And Magnus does exactly that. I'm not saying he's winning, I'm just saying he's creating some very serious practical chances for himself, offering a trade here, bringing the knight back. Somehow Magnus understands that despite being down material, he actually can trade the queens and continue to pressure on the queen side, but the game actually ended in a bit of a tragic way. Magnus here finds the nice idea bishop d5. If you take my bishop, I take your rook, and then despite the opposite colored bishops generally lead to more drawn endgames. It was Peter Svidler retreating, and Magnus here once again offering this bishop, because after this, there is a discovered attack on the king, and if this, you will take the bishop and have bishop and several pawns for the rook. But Peter Svidler played the move rook b7. Peter Svidler did not blunder a rook. I hypothesized that he mouse slipped and didn't take on b6, and just resigned the game. Now, I actually imagine that Magnus Carlsen here could have offered a repetition of moves, something like this, just to get to the same position, but that's not Magnus's fault. He didn't even take the win. Peter just resigned. He played rook b7 and just hit the resign button. I'm sure Magnus would have continued the game. You guys were saying, you guys were upset that Fabiano took the win, the mouse slip on Garry Kasparov, but I think that Magnus would have done it. Peter just threw in the towel and gave Magnus the full point. The other game that was decisive in the first round was Fabiano Caruana versus Alireza Faruja. This one was just so complicated. I mean, there's too many variations to calculate, but what I will say is here we saw Fabi playing on the h-file and still pressuring on the queen side. And more than anything else, I think what happens here is that Fabi has an extremely strong position due to his light-squared bishop. Just like in the Magnus Carlsen game, the light-squared bishop here proved to be superior, and Fabi just improved his position on both sides of the board. Watch as Fabi just brings back the bishop to the center, brings the bishop here, and then brings it back so this bishop stops guarding this pawn, right? And rotates over to that side. And then at the same time, watch as Fabiano swoops in from this side of the board. Pressure on both sides, and Alireza at this point in a deep time trouble allows a breakthrough and blunders the knight, ultimately playing just a few more moves and getting into a situation where he is checkmated on move 44. Alireza really struggled this tournament. Fabiano in cruise control. Round 2 featured Alireza going up against Hikaru, and that was an interesting game. It started out with Hikaru doing some peculiar shuffling, and actually Alireza had a very good position within the first 10 moves. But just like in Fischer Random, the past few days, your position being better in the first 8 to 10 moves doesn't mean a whole lot, because the position is so odd and so unique that it's difficult to always capitalize on an advantage. I'll quickly back up to this point. Here, Alireza sacrificed the pawn and didn't take back, but rotates his knight to h4 to go here, and the bishop and the queen from the corner hit the pawn and directly look at this bishop back here. It's a common idea actually in the Queen's Indian, so we see that themes overlap. And then Hikaru doubles these pawns for Alireza. The position really heats up right up until this moment. Here Hikaru offers Alireza, here Hikaru offers Alireza, more importantly, the sacrifice of this pawn. He says, Alireza, you take, I block, and then I'm going to start an attack down this side of the board to kind of avoid your bishop. Your bishop is really strong, but not if I'm attacking your king. It turns out that that was the way that Alireza should have continued the game, and instead of doing that, he played solidly, but that allowed Hikaru a moment to consolidate, and even though Alireza was creating tactics here potentially with the sacrifice, Hikaru consolidated his position, and this is very important. He activates his knight, and the second that Alireza moves the bishop off of the diagonal, Hikaru jumps in, threatening knight to e2, hitting both of these pieces. It looks like this move leads to mate, because if takes, checkmate with the bishop supporting the queen, but the rook guards. You notice, in this position, the rook does not guard, but the sacrifice here allows the queen to be safeguarding the pawns, and for the rook to be safeguarding the h6 square. Nice little geometry there, and Hikaru, once the knight got activated, was able to take on e2, and here Alireza resigned because he actually just has no way to guard his bishop. If he moves the bishop out to e3, then Hikaru probably just chops away with f4 and there's nothing. If you take, well, there's a couple of moves here, but the most direct is queen down to d1 check, which wins the rook and a decisive amount of material. And Hikaru wins. A big win there for Hikaru after he drew in the round leading up to this one. And after round 8, Hikaru was tied for first. And so was Magnus Carlsen. The other decisive game in round number 8 was the game between Levon Aronian and MVL. I'm not going to spoil anything. I'm going to say it was a decisive game. But these two are friends, and you would have expected that they would be a bit more tranquil with their matchup. But Levon is playing for first place, and MVL is playing for pride. I mean, he had a rough first 2 days. He's picking up a few wins. Let's see what happens. So, quick trade early on by the players. And again, the queens are trapped in the corner, so let's see who's going to activate them. Levon surprised me. Levon castled and played b4 and a4, only focusing on that side of the board rather than activating his queen. And he, again, made this trade, and now if anybody's queen is activated, it's this guy's. Rook d1, and all of a sudden your king has to guard the pawn. That's not going to be good. That's not the way you're going to get it done. b6, e3 hits the knight, knight comes back to f5. Another move that doesn't seem like it's doing anything in the position. And then MVL took over. A couple of forward moves here, knight d5 and c5, and just kept pushing away. Push that c-pawn all the way down to c3, advantageously making a simplification. You'll notice that he trades off the knight, the bishop, but here black has a very clear advantage for two main reasons. Number one, his pieces are a lot more active. His pieces are threatening to come down, come out, hit the king. Knight is looking at every single pawn, and this queen and king are very awkwardly positioned. This game did not last much longer, actually, as Levon Aronian lost his a-pawn and then blundered this catastrophic move. Knight takes g3. Again, the king safety is everything, and the king safety collapses. King h1 followed by rook h4 checkmate. If you play king f1 in this position, you don't quite lose immediately, but still I'm going to play something like rook g4, and I'm threatening mate, I'm threatening this. It's very, very bad. And a shocking result, as Levon Aronian, the leader of the tournament for a few rounds, loses to MVL, who just a few rounds ago was in last place. MVL stuns, wins with the black pieces, and that was the only other decisive result in round number 8. Going into the final round, it was Magnus Carlsen up top with 5.5, Hikaru Nakamura tied with him with 5.5, and it was Wesley So and Levon Aronian competing for first place with 5 points out of 8. Let's see what happened. First things first, Wesley So was playing Alireza Faruja. Well, this is easy. I mean, Alireza's on tilt. He lost to Fabiano. He lost to Hikaru Nakamura. So let's see how Wesley tries to pick up the point against Alireza. I don't know what this was, but Wesley seemed to make it work. Consolidating early. And then trying to trade off the bishop. Alireza gets a trade as well. The knight's very solid. Rook is protecting the pawn. Let's bring this queen out and castle long. Wesley won't sit there. Wesley begins to try to chip away at this pawn structure here. Let's see what happens. The queen takes f5 and the queen comes in. Very scary, hitting a lot of different targets. Wesley takes on d5, gives away the pawn, and then trades pieces. So Wesley here, rook knight and 5, rook knight and 5. Not a position that you should be playing really for a win or for a loss. Then his g-pawn fell, and it fell because had he played a move like rook g3 defending the g-pawn, he probably didn't like that after long castles here, that this pawn's just a target. And this knight is super strong, can jump into f4, threatening this in the future. I know it's protected by the knight, but I'm saying that this knight won't be able to move. And so for that reason, he probably wasn't a big fan, sacrificed the pawn, and went for the draw. And Alireza took a long time to settle his king. In fact, he never actually castled it. He just moved it. He gave away the pawn on c5. But then, all of a sudden, just invested fully into f-pawn industries. And invested fully into f-pawn industries. And in this position, Wesley So resigned. Because there's just nothing you can do. You can take on c7 with a check, but after king b7, your rook is hanging, your knight's hanging. And there's actually just nothing to be done. Takes leads to a promotion and a back rank mate. And Wesley just, I don't know, just didn't play very well. And Alireza got a win. Wesley So was left on 5 points. There was 2 games that decided the fate of first place. One of them was Peter Svidler with the black pieces against Hikaru Nakamura. Going into this game, Svidler was ranked 9th out of 10. He was having a disastrous event, but he got a great position within the first 10 moves. He actually was putting some serious pressure on Hikaru. Not the first 10, but about the first 15. Svidler snuck in here with his queen, and Hikaru was forced to chuck the pawn, hide his king, and start moving with his rooks. And Svidler was playing brilliant chess. He brought in a queen trade, brought in the c-pawn, and everything is guarded. And even though this rook is perched very nicely on g6, this was Peter Svidler's game to win. But Hikaru used a couple of things. First of all, he used the clock. He put some clock pressure on Svidler, like 5 minutes versus 2, getting Svidler low on time. And then a timely breaking up of the structure on the queen side. Hikaru brought his bishop back, and the second that Svidler came forward here with the pawns, Hikaru offered a trade. And if we had gotten d3 locking the position, Hikaru would have went for this, breaking apart the defense. A very instructive move here. Peter Svidler should have played the move a4. This clamps down on the move b3. And if cd4 happens, you have bishop d4 with a slight advantage because you can play the move b5. If I ever play the move rook c1, for example, you're going to play b5, and I cannot break apart your structure. So you notice that the light squared pawns complement the dark squared bishop here for black. The move a4 would have clamped down the counterplay, but that didn't happen, and Hikaru was able to create counterplay on the queen side by creating pawn breaks, and in this position, offered Peter a draw, and Peter accepted. Hikaru finished the tournament with 6 points out of 9. Nice. And the final round also featured Magnus Carlsen versus Levon Aronian. The marquee matchup. This is for first place. This is not scripted. They were set to play a round-robin style. Magnus Carlsen half a point ahead. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces. Magnus Carlsen, here we go. Some solid play early on, getting a nice solid structure, trading off the dark squared bishops, and even the queens. But This position is better for Magnus. It's better for Magnus because he's got a more active pawn structure. He is negating the movement of the enemy pieces, and he's also up on time, which is not shown here, but he does have a time advantage. And you'll notice that Levon Aronian does not make any move beyond here, with the exception of this bishop, for a while. You know, this bishop is moving around in White's territory, but nothing else. Levon playing super passively, basically going like this. Come throw a punch, see if you can hit me. Magnus slowly improving his position, trying to create weaknesses here on h7. And Levon did crack. He did crack. He cracked as his time dwindled lower and lower. Magnus improving his position on both sides of the board. Right here on move 41, the blunder occurs. Knight c6, and here Magnus can take a big lead in the position with takes and g6, creating serious winning chances. Probably black has to bail out in a position where you sacrifice the piece for a pawn or two and say, look, man, you are not going to beat me in an endgame with pawn, knight, bishop versus pawn, pawn, knight. Let's not forget that knight versus knight and bishop would be a draw. The knight and the bishop cannot defeat a knight. It's not possible. You need a little bit more than that. But Magnus didn't take and play g6. He just played g6, and he hung his knight. What? He just hung his knight. It's a move order thing. He has to take, and go g6. And Magnus just hangs his knight. And knight comes back, and now Levon Aronian is just up a pawn. And a few moves later, many moves later, some shuffling here as Levon trying to fake that he's going to play this for a win. This happens, draw agreed, and Magnus also ends the tournament with 6 out of 9 points. A very nice score. Getting first place tie with Hikaru Nakamura. This is your final standings of the Champions Showdown. A tie for 3rd and 4th between Fabiano Caruana with 5.5 and Levon Aronian. Wesley So drops down to 5. The first place split between Hikaru and Magnus is $31,000. And actually afterward, we were interviewing Hikaru and I asked him a funny question. I said, is this the most disappointing $31,000 you've ever won? He did say, no one's happy. You know, Hikaru's not happy that he didn't play very well in the last round, but he still got a draw. Magnus not happy because he was trying to press for a win and also ended up getting just a draw. But the Champions Showdown ends in this fashion, with both Hikaru and Magnus continuing their dominance over these online events. There's a rest day tomorrow, and then coverage will continue on Tuesday. Myself, Anna Rudolph, doing the commentary on Hikaru's Twitch channel, and one of ours as where it is restreamed too. If you made it this far in the video, well, you're amazing. You look great today. I put on another, nice shirt. You guys seem to like the last one. And again, if you're not yet subscribed, subscribe. Let's try to pass Twitch to 100,000. Twitch is currently at 86,000. We're at about 78, 79. Let's get there. Take care, everybody, and I'll see you on Tuesday for the next recap.